All righty, everybody. Welcome to the first webinar of the 2018 Steer Profitability Competition. We appreciate you all joining us. We see a number of you are on with us. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Some of you remember this from last year, but certainly some of you are new. If you can, there's an icon that looks like a microphone. If you could keep that muted, it makes it easier for everybody to hear, and we don't get a lot of feedback coming through the mics. If you have a question, feel free to unmute and ask that question. It's actually probably even a little bit easier for you where there's a spot where you can click on something that looks like a little hand, like you're raising your hand. You can click on that and ask a question, just like that. Or you can chat a question, and we'll get it that way. So that's the protocol for that piece. So you know, from a staff standpoint, there are a number of us on tonight. Primarily, you'll hear from Jackie Atkins, Rachel Endicott, Kelsey Stimpson, and myself. And there'll be a few other folks listening in. They might even have something to chime in. So we want to make good use of your time, so we're going to get fired up fairly quickly. So what we want to accomplish tonight is a couple things. One, we want to bring you up to date on the status of your steers, where things are at present. And so let's do that first. As you all know, through the help and support of a number of you all, we brought a lot of your cattle from various places around the country to Columbia, Missouri over the last number of days. And so we appreciate that. A number of you were very collaborative and offered a lot of assistance in various ways, helping us move those cattle around, and we greatly appreciate that. We have calves from 9 different states that have come to see us, and so we'll talk a little bit more about those in a few moments. You can see then, as you saw before, just a reminder, because you'll be able to access this webinar once it's posted online tomorrow. So in case you ever wish, or you're in the central Missouri area, you're driving down Interstate 70 or something of that nature, and you would like to see those calves, you are welcome. In fact, in the next number of days, if you haven't already, you will receive an email that tells you what tag numbers are your calves and which pins they're in. Now, actually, most of you are going to have your calves in very defined pins, and they'll stay in those pins throughout the project. And so if you wish to go in there, the farm manager has made it very clear you are very welcome to do that. Just make us aware so we can make him aware so that we're respectful of his time. But he is more than happy if you're in that part of the world to pop in, so for what that's worth to you. These are actually the pins that your calves will reside in, and this is important beyond just a picture that says, oh, that's cool, that's home. I want you to understand what you're looking at here. This particular facility has a number of different pin arrangements, and we could have tried different options. This is the set of pins that they felt made the most sense for you all as the cattle feeders in this particular enterprise. These pins tend to generate very effective gains for them, for the calves that have been in them. These pins are, as you can tell, there's a roof. These pins are about 2/3 of the way covered. Interestingly enough, these are relatively small pins that allow us then the freedom to actually keep most of your calves together. So if you send a pin of 3 and those calves are all in one pin together, now they may have another friend with them, maybe an individual steer that wasn't a part of a pin of 3, but your pins have been able to stay together because of the courtesy of this place and the folks there at the University of Missouri. Also, what's important about this facility is something that you know we were excited about from the beginning, is unfettered access to a grow safe system. And for those of you who've never seen a grow safe system, I just wanted to get a chance to see it, and this picture does a little bit of justice to it. Essentially, a grow safe system is a feed bunk on a bunch of load cells, waste scale, more or less, underneath this feed bunk right here. And this particular half, where you can see this number 39, this is one feed bunk assigned to this pin right here. And what happens is a calf can come in there, the equipment reads the EID tag in the calf's ear. It is transmitted up to this little box right here, which shoots it off to the office, and it's constantly recording that information. And so you can see down through here, there are a whole host of these pins, and each one of these systems right here actually represents 2 different pins, so it's 2 different bunks in one. So just wanted you to have a visual of where your calves are going to call home, and if you go by to see them, or if you join us in the April field day, you'll get to see them up close and personal. So on Monday, yesterday, we worked your calves through the chutes. They were vaccinated. We used Bovishield Gold 5 on that particular group, a very common and popular product. They were dewormed with Safeguard, again, a pretty prevalent product and many of you are familiar with. This feed-yard, as you recall, in your agreements to sign on to this project, the feed-yard has sole discretion when it comes to any implant strategy. Their desire is to implant those calves immediately, and so they were implanted at the same time with the Elanco component IS, and so that all took place then yesterday. Simultaneous to that, the calves received their new SPC ear tags. You can see on the right that calves received in lot 75. That was in fact the last calf on the day, and so that was always that's a pleasant one to find. On the left, we're actually, that's a picture of somebody capturing DNA or a tissue sample with the Allflex TSU or the tissue tagger that you maybe have heard us reference in our earlier informational webinar. And so that all took place yesterday. These are an assortment of those tissue samples in those vials, and I'll save any more comments on that. Dr. Atkins is going to have some comments for you a little bit later on that, so I'll hold my water there. So then the calves, once they were sorted, you can see they're putting their pins. This is pretty typical of what the pin setup look like. These pins are capable of handling 5 fat steers. These pins are also bedded frequently, and so you will see throughout the course of the project, whenever bedding needs to be changed, that will be reflected on your feed bill or on your monthly bill, and you will see that. So fortunately, with this system that Allflex has been generous enough to donate to you all, this is what we have. We have a tissue sample, we have a visual ear tag, and an EID tag that all correspond to one another. So if you look closely on this sample tag, this yellow visual tag, you can see it has a number, 98200, so on and so forth. And that is a corresponding number then to this EID tag. Also then it corresponds to this tissue sample that gets sent to the lab. Now, how a GrowSafe works, without going into too much detail on it today, is this EID tag is placed, and it has to be placed fairly strategically for the system to read it. You don't want the EID to get too low in the ear, it can struggle to read a little bit. It's placed on the top, kind of on the top side of the ear. You can see a little bit of white right there on this calf. You see a little bit of one up on this calf over there. And what happens right now, your calves are actually on a receiving diet, a high roughage diet, just to get them comfortable, get them acclimated. But in the coming days, some of the bars will be removed from the middle of this GrowSafe bunk, and they will start getting a little bit of limited access inside there to taste some feed, to get used to the GrowSafe system. And once we go full bore, these EIDs will be what allow us to communicate back and forth with that GrowSafe system to get that constant information and to get that accurate feed intake on a daily basis that we all desire. We're so excited about it from the beginning of this project. And so now, I want to go through a little bit of the demographics of your steers. So, interestingly enough, this is just a breakdown of some of the breed type and genetic awareness of your group. So, this particular set of calves is all told roughly 48% Simmental blood. So, essentially half of the genetic makeup of these calves is Simmental. There are a couple calves that actually have 0 Simmental in them. There are a number of calves that are essentially 100% Simmental. And so there's a wide range, but it wouldn't be a big shock to you that in today's world, as we talk so much about cattle like the terminology Simangus, that half the cattle in this particular feed out, or half of the genetics, would be Simmental genetics. The second most prevalent breed, and probably wouldn't come as a huge shock to you as well, these calves are roughly 31% Angus blood. And the cattle that have Angus blood range from, or excuse me, the cattle in the group range from having 0 Angus blood to up to 3/4. There are 4 other breed types represented: Red Angus, Gelbvieh, Limousin, Hereford, and then there are some commercial unknown cattle that are represented in terms of some genetics in their background. Now, interesting pieces that get me excited as I start digging into the data. Anytime you can look at a set of feeder calves and you say across the group they're in the top 33% across a whole host of terminal categories, you're looking at a pretty impressive group of feeder calves. And what you see right there listed are what are considered to be the most relevant terminal traits at this point in this calf's life. Obviously, one of the most crucial being average daily gain, or the ADG area. And you can see that the average daily gain, average EPD for average daily gain within this group is 0.25. So what that says is that your calves, on average, are in the top 20% of the hybrid Simmentals in our database. That's impressive. To the right, you can see that the calves in this particular group actually range from 0.05 to 0.43 for average daily gain. FYI, anything over 0.3 is quite impressive. Carcass weight EPD, again, the average EPD in this particular group is nearly 31.5 pounds of added carcass weight. That places that average in the top 30%, and you can see that range on the right from almost 8 pounds to the top side of almost 64 pounds of added carcass weight EPD. We look at the YG, or the yield grade EPD. Again, it might not surprise some of you, but when you look at this, this is the only category you go chip. It's only in the top 60%. That really means that it's in the bottom 40%. You'd be accurate about that. That's probably not a big shock to some of you all if you're involved in cattle feeding very much, or you keep your eye on maybe some of the roles that you use or that your family produces. We live in a world where yield grade is not really heavily as penalized as it once was, and in our thirst to add marbling, we've sacrificed on the side a little bit, and so it's not uncommon at all in today's world that those cattle that are high growth, those cattle that have a lot of marbling, tend to pack a little bit of extra back fat and thus have poor yield grades. And so your cattle are in the top 60%, or at least the average of the group is. But you can see then on the right that your cattle range from 0.03 to a very impressive number of nearly a negative 0.6 for yield grade. Negative is better in that category. Marbling EPD, the average of this group is 0.635. I am not surprised at all that this is an impressive group for that category. Likely there are two key pieces that folks focus on when you think about terminal merit and feeder calf, and that's average daily gain and marbling, outside of obviously basic herd health. But from a genetic standpoint, average daily gain and marbling drive the business. And so that you're in the top 10% as a group, you can see on the right. We have a pretty wide range in that area, from calves that are floating around 0 to calves that are even over 1. And that is, again, not to be redundant, 1.37 is a tremendously impressive marbling EPD. And we certainly would want to incorporate our indexes because, frankly, that is one of the things that has driven the Simmental population in mass in a positive direction as we work with these indexes. And so we have two different indexes that we use. You all are likely familiar with the all-purpose index. The average API in this group is 155 and some change. That is top 10% in our database. Again, a tremendous number for a set of feeder steers, and you can see they range from approaching 90 to one calf in here is approaching 200 at 190. That is on the cutting edge, ladies and gentlemen. And then TI, our TI, which is again that index that takes into account purely terminal merit. So it wouldn't shock us then that would be reasonably high given the parameters we saw before. And in fact, it very much is. It's actually about the top 7.5% at 82.5, and you can see the range on the right. So that gives you a little bit of the demographics of the genetic profile of your calves and some of the ranges within those calves. Also, some of you may have, or maybe your parents have heard about a new tool that we broke out late in the summer. And this actually happened after last year's steer profitability competition was over. And that's our new IGS feeder profit calculator, which is very much designed specifically to determine the profit potential of a set of feeder calves. I had to make some basic assumptions here just to have some comparisons for you. But I just assumed that essentially all of these calves were out of Semi-Angus cows. To be honest, that's not an accurate assumption. And when time allows, I will adjust it more accurately to reflect your calves. But frankly, given the time getting in here, that just hasn't happened. But if that were the case, what you would see is that roughly speaking, the average profit calculator total relative value is $8.86. That is a tremendously good number, meaning what that means is, so you understand what that number is about, that means on any given day, on average, the steers in this group would break even at, even if you spend an extra $8.86 a hundred on them over the average calf. So it means you can afford to pay almost $9 more or 9 cents a pound more for this calf and the average calf in the industry and still come out okay. So that's an impressive number, and you can see the range is from $5 to over $13. There are 64 steers total in this year's project. We started with a few more registered, but as unfortunately some things happen. We had a few steers get sick, and a handful of things just didn't work out. And those things, we all know that's part of the business. And so we have 64 steers that are on feed, and that's also part of the reason we had a number of you ask, well, when will I get my $50 fee for my entry fee? We wanted to wait till those calves actually got to us because we didn't want to unnecessarily charge you for steers that might not actually make it into the feed jar. And so you'll only get billed for the 64. So as we stated early on in the project, we have to come up with initial valuation for this particular set of calves. So they came in late last week. So we pull up the USDA's Nebraska Weekly Summary from the end of last week. They give the Nebraska Feeder Calf Report, and it's very representative and a very high quality measure trying to look at what feeder calves are going for at a given point in time. If you don't know, feeder calves bumped up a little bit last week, and depends upon your situation. You might like that a lot, you might not. If you're selling or buying, in this case, you're actually doing a little bit of both, right? Because you're retaining ownership on these calves. So this is where they broke down. If your calf came in weighing 4 to 5, they were worth nearly $200 a hundredweight or $2 a pound. All the way down, if you had a calf that was in the 8 to 9 range, they were worth about $169 a hundred or $1.69 a pound. If we compare that then to the information on the right, so you know the average weight of your calves was just shy of 665 pounds, with a weight range that fell maybe a little outside of our initial desires, but we work with what we have in front of us. We have a weight range from 446 to 850. Roughly, what was it, 17 calves fell outside of that prescribed area of 550 to 750, and we knew that. A number of you reached out and said, hey, I've got calves that are maybe a little bit young, or I've got some calves that are a little bit heavy, and you were struggling to hold them back a little bit. And so we knew some of them were going to come, and that's okay because it all works itself out, because then those calves, their initial valuation is reflective of their weight coming in, so it kind of balances itself out. So you know when we take that average initial weight and we assign initial values to all the calves, the average initial value of the calves coming in was just shy of $1,160 a calf. And you can see here at the bottom that they range from a little under $900 to a little over $1,400. Remember, this initial valuation is important to you because relative to the competition, this is viewed as an expense. This is where your expenses start. Shipping and the cost of this calf, because again, you could have sold this calf and realized that money. So now we have to view it as a cost. And so this is just a reminder from the very beginning how we do this particular competition. So we will take that initial valuation and we will accrue costs from the time you drop them off at the truck all the way through to harvest. And we'll add up all those costs and we'll add them to the initial valuation. And simply at the end, we'll take the value of the carcass of your calf minus those costs, and that will be your steer profitability competition overall score, or your end profitability. A couple things to also remind you of since we're just getting started. Remember, we have these monthly meetings. Some of you will be listening to these maybe in the next day because sometimes you'll have some other commitments, so we understand that. Remember, they'll be posted the following day. You need to be looking at them pretty directly, and you need to do your reports. We are going to be pretty diligent on this year, and if you miss more than one write-up, you will be eliminated from the SPC program. What does that mean? It means you'll still owe the University of Missouri an ASA for feeding those cattle. You will still get the paycheck when your calf goes to town, but you will not know how your calf did relative to the others in the competition, and you will not get any awards, prizes, even if your calf comes out in a good spot. You will not be allowed to participate in that portion of the program. So do your write-ups. It's not that big a process. We want you to get that done. Also, while I'm thinking about it, another quick note, I'm not prepared to talk to you about this exactly on this call, but you'll probably get some information about it in the next number of days. Those of you that were with us last year know that we had a group that was very kind and was willing to help us get mortality insurance on these calves. Mortality insurance on fat steers is not an easy thing to do. And in the real world, it's just not done. There's just not, it's too expensive to handle this. However, this firm, Ideal, has been kind enough once again to work with us, and we are just about to hammer out the final details. I can tell you that what I think is going to come down is that you're going to have an opportunity, should you wish, to buy a mortality policy between $40 and $50 a calf. Now, I want you to know that it's more expensive than last year by about twice, but there are some reasons for that. If you want to know what those are, we can talk about them individually. But again, that is a significant price tag. What you get for that, should a calf perish while in the yard prior to its appropriate harvest time, you get $1,000. So that may not cover everything, but it certainly can help. And we had a couple families last year that kind of went down this path, and so they can tell you that these things can happen and will happen. And so I would encourage you, when we send that information out, that you and your folks talk thoroughly about, do you want to take this on, or would you rather not? It's completely up to you. I'll answer any questions. We're not quite ready to talk to you about the details. We're still working through those now, but you might see those, and those might come out to you even prior to the next newsletter, because if this comes together, we'd like to get that in your hands as early as possible, just on the off chance something would happen. I'm going to be quiet for a minute, and I'm going to introduce you to Kelsey Stimpson. Kelsey is an intern with ASA, has worked closely with our junior programs, and she is going to be the lead person when it comes to your webinar reports. And so she has put together a rubric so you can kind of understand scoring a little bit. I'm going to be quiet and let her explain.
All right, thank you, Chip, and good afternoon, everyone. I don't want to take a whole lot of time here, but this is an important part of our competition here, so I'm just going to run over this with you guys. This year we've kind of made a few changes, and we're going to make this a little bit bigger deal. We're actually going to be giving out awards at the National Classic for these things, so we want you guys to be rewarded for taking the time to write these essays and make sure that we score them accurately. And because we have such a broad range of participants this year, we're actually going to do it in 3 divisions. So we don't want a 10-year-old to be competing against a 20-year-old, because they're obviously on very different levels there. So we'll follow National Classic age guidelines with the junior, intermediate, and senior division when we are grading these essays. So the main thing that we want you guys to focus on is making sure that you review the webinar content. So the things that Chip and Jackie are going to be talking about and have been talking about tonight, we want you guys to talk about what you learned, what you gained from this webinar. We want you to add in anything else and elaborate on how you can implement these things into the real world, or in your operation at home, or in cattle feeding in general. And since this is an essay, we want you guys to take what you have learned in school and make sure to write a thorough essay that has good flow. You know, focus on grammar and spelling. Although this isn't English class, try to keep errors, minimal. And then we want you guys, it says 1.5 to 1 pages, but we're kind of going to go off of 500 to 1,000 words, which if you type that in Times New Roman at 12-point font, that kind of pans out to be 1.5 pages if you double space that. And the way that this will work is each thing has its own little rubric score, and you will be scored out of 100, and each section will have a certain allotment of points. And once you get to the length, if you reach the length requirement, you'll get 5 points, and if you don't reach the length requirement, you'll lose 5 points. So if you guys have any more questions on this, feel free to email us at the SPC account, or give any of us a call and we can help you out with that. And I think that we'll get this out there for you guys so that you can have this to reference to. And one other thing I wanted to add on a different note is Chip had mentioned the entry fee, and we sent those in today. So if you have not already been billed, be watching in the next few days for your $50 per head entry fee. That will be showing up on your account just shortly. So I'll turn it back over to Chip for now.
Thank you, Kelsey. And she's very accurate. We wish to definitely highlight this area of the competition a little more than what we did last year. And so we want to be able to recognize folks. And here in a minute, I'm going to mention another thing that's relevant to you about highlighting you all. And so this is just one step to maybe give you a bit more structure of what we're looking for so that you have a little bit more of a clue what we're trying to get at. And it also gives you another opportunity for success, as we're going to recognize some of you in this particular area. So here's that exciting news I wanted to make you aware of, because you all are actually charting some unknown territory, and so we want you to know it now so that should you need to make plans, you can. Recently, our AJSA trustees, along with our senior trustees, have put in place a new set of rules for next year's regional and national classics. And if you're not familiar with the National Classic, that is essentially our junior national, or our national show for the juniors. And this coming year will be in St. Paul, Minnesota. This year, they're doing yet another thing. Again, some of you've heard me say we operate in a way that others won't, and as a result, we can do things that others simply can't. And here's another example of your breed association trying to be creative for you. You are going to have an opportunity to be a part of the National Classic should you wish. And so your SPC steers will be a full portion of the cattle division of the show next year at Junior Nationals, meaning that they will be assigned points just as any of the show cattle would be that are on hand on that particular event. So should you have an interest in participating at the National Classic, you'll still have to register just like everybody else would be when all that information comes out in the coming months. But you would not necessarily have to take cattle if you didn't wish. Your cattle in this program would be your cattle entry, and they would qualify you. You would still have to go and participate in the mandatory contest. But if you participated in those contests on site, you would be eligible for the overall awards for the various divisions of juniors at the National Classic. And so we are super excited about that. And if you have questions or comments on that, certainly you can make us aware of those here tonight, or you can ask when you have follow-up questions. The information and rules and all the details, you'll need to read through those, and that stuff will be posted at Junior Simmental in the fairly near future. I'm going to scan past that because the dates that you need for the most part have been put together on your newsletter. And I know that each of you received the first newsletter some number of days ago. I hope you appreciated yet another area that we've really stepped up our game. And I say we, knowing that I haven't done very much of this piece at all. Kelsey has pretty much full credit for this effort. And we hope that you like the level of awareness, the level of professionalism that this newsletter offers. Not only does it provide a lot of good content, but it also provides dates that are very important for you. And so you can see just here on this kind of screenshot of the first page of that newsletter, you can see a number of dates, and these dates are certainly relevant to your life in terms of upcoming bills. You will not receive a bill until into December because of the timeline of things involved. I just want you to be aware of those things, and you can always review that newsletter that you receive for some of those details. With that, I am going to be quiet. And I'm going to turn this back over. Well, first of all, if anybody has questions, fire them away. Otherwise, Jackie is going to share some information with you.
Hey, Chip. So just a couple of questions that have been typed in here, and I responded to them. But to make everybody aware, those reports get emailed to the SPC account. The email account that you've been, where you got the newsletter from and reminders of this webinar. So that's how you want to do that. So electronically attach that to the email and send it on to us. That's spc@simmgene.com, SIMMGENE.com. And the other question we had was, what those reports should be about and the length, and I think Kelsey covered that nicely, but if you have any follow-up questions there, sure, feel free to type those in, and we'll keep an eye out for them.
Very good.
Okay. So I've got just some follow-up material. Chip, do you want me to charge ahead with that?
Yep. And I'll watch for any questions.
Okay, sounds good. So let me. Some feedback there. I'm not quite sure where that's coming from. Oh, okay, I think we're good. Okay, so I'm going to do a very quick and dirty introduction to DNA testing. This is kind of a crash course given the amount of time that we have to go over this topic. But because your calves are in the lot and we have those Allflex TSU tags kindly donated to us, and GeneSeek has very generously donated the genotyping fee to get all those calves genotyped. We're moving forward with that, and we just wanted to bring you all aware of why this is even important. So we sure want to thank our sponsors, Allflex, for donating the TSU units, those little units that Chip showed you. Pretty slick new advancement in technology where you can collect tissue samples directly. They could, an ear punch goes directly into that tube, and that tissue sample keeps for years and years and years. And there's lots of benefits associated with that TSU that we can talk about in more detail later on in the talk if we get to that point. And GeneSeek, like I said, has very generously waived the fee to genotype these calves. So we will go into, what does that mean to genotype these calves, but they are doing this as a partnership with us and with you all, which is wonderful. So why should you care about DNA testing? There's certainly DNA test requirements associated with a lot of different breed associations. So hopefully this talk will help you understand what those test requirements are. I'm not going to go into details about the specifics of what those requirements are, but you can understand what they're asking for better. It's really a powerful technology, and at a comparatively small price. If you compare DNA testing to progeny testing, which is what you would have to do in the good old days if you wanted to figure out if you had, a heterozygous black bull, you would have to breed them and wait for those calves to be on the ground and take a look at those calves to know whether or not that animal carried a red gene. And so having a test, a simple DNA test for that, gets you that answer immediately. And there's certainly a lot to be said for that savings of time, plus the expense of progeny testing is huge. And really, genomics is just an ever-expanding field, and it's something that's going to become more and more important to genetic evaluation. So it's not going away, and so it's important for you to have, kind of a basic understanding of it. And also, outside of kind of our small sphere of our small world of agriculture, just being able to communicate with the consumer and the public at a higher level if you understand more about DNA and DNA testing, certainly things like GMOs, cloning, genetic abnormalities, a relatively newer technology is gene editing, where they can go in and actually edit that particular gene so you can, make animals polled if that's what you want them to be. And so anyway, to make yourself a more informed communicator to a very serious consumer and serious public when it comes to animal agriculture, I think it's really important to understand this area. So here's a little bit about me and my family, just to give you some perspective. Here's my parents, my dad Jim and my mom Loa. Here's my older brother Jason, my older sister Angie, myself, and my younger brother John. And I swear we are all full Sibs out of these two individuals, but we all have varying traits. I have hazel eyes, and my older brother has brown eyes. My two brothers are well beyond 6 feet tall, and my sister and I barely can reach, 5'4", 5'5" if I'm wearing, the right shoes. And so certainly there are things within our environment that influence what our observed traits are. I have been known to get rather close to some bleach and lighten my hair, and so there's things in my environment that are changing the way I look, but there are also things in our DNA that influence that outcome. And so really the phenotype, or the observed characteristic, is a product of the DNA, or the genotype, and the environment, and the interaction of those two components. And so really the environment we have more control over with different management practices and different decisions, but the genotype is the component of those traits that we can get after with tools like EPDs, or expected progeny differences. And so that genotype is what we're after with DNA testing. We're trying to understand the different DNA that animal has, and how those different pieces of DNA are associated with predicting the phenotypes of their offspring. So here's a quick look at DNA in cattle. DNA is kind of the component that is inherited from your father and mother, or the sire and the dam, and it's passed along to the offspring in 30 pairs of chromosomes, and those chromosomes lie in the nucleus of the cell. And the reason why that can be important is you have to have the nucleus of the cell in whatever form of DNA you're sending to the lab. And so, for instance, if somebody is sending in hair to the lab and they just cut off the shaft of the hair, that does not contain the nucleus of that cell. The nucleus is in the root bulb of the hair, and so it's very important, if you're sending in hair, that you pull the hair from the tail and make sure that you have the root bulb there. Otherwise, the lab can't do anything with just the shaft of the hair. But anyway, so the cattle have DNA, have 30 pairs of chromosomes in the nucleus of the cell. And the other interesting thing about this that I find fascinating is every single cell has that same set of 30 chromosomes, yet there's a lot of variation in what your different cells do and what their function is, and how the body knows that it's a blood cell versus a skin cell or a muscle cell, and all of that is controlled by what pieces of the DNA get translated into proteins and kind of workhorses of those cells. These chromosomes think of them as long strings, like strings of yarn, and they get wrapped up real tight inside that cell. But along that string, if you were to kind of unravel it, there's nucleotides, which is a term for the structure that vary. The sequence of those nucleotides vary along that string of chromosome, and there's 4 options for those nucleotides. You don't need to worry about exactly what they're called, but they're abbreviated A, G, T and C. And so in cattle, there are 3 billion nucleotides that the sequence makes up those 30 pair of chromosomes, and that entire sequence is referred to as their genome. That's the entire suite of nucleotides. And so the sequence of these nucleotides is highly shared among cattle, or even comparing cattle to humans. But there are certain places along this sequence where these nucleotides differ. And those changes in the nucleotide, if one animal has a G there and another animal has a C there, can make a big difference. It can be the difference between an animal having a black coat or an animal having a red coat. They can make subtle changes, like maybe that makes that animal slightly better equipped to grow after weaning than the animal next to them, depending on what this single nucleotide, what variation they have there. And so we refer to those variations as SNPs, or SNPs. And this is really the key to modern DNA testing, is revolving around these SNPs, these single points along the genome that influence different traits. So the DNA testing that we're going to focus on, we can talk about this at a different date, or talk about it in the newsletter, that we do quite a bit of testing for simple traits and conditions like coat color dilution, horn fold, a variety of genetic conditions. But for this project, we are focused on doing parent verification and doing SNP testing with these panels, the SNP panels that we refer to with GeneSeq as the GGP-LD or the GGP-HD. And those panels allow us to improve the accuracy of the EPDs associated with all those different traits that Chip was referring to earlier. So we're going to talk about those two components here in the next few minutes. Okay, so So on parentage, there's about 100 SNPs, or 100 points along the genome that they look at for different variations. And so this is just a quick example looking at 4 different variations along the genome, and looking at different test results for these animals and how we would determine which parents qualify to this calf. So we've got the calf at the top here, and these blue lines signify, the chromosomes, and the nucleotide that animal has at those different locations in the chromosome. We've got a dam, a potential dam that we're going to compare that calf to, and then we've got 2 different sires that we want to look at. And so this we would refer to as a trio mating. If we could compare the dam and the sire to that calf, that's more powerful, as you will see here in a second. So here's this table shows you what conclusions we can make along the way at each one of these locations. So at SNP1, this SNP at the far left here, the calf has an A and a T. The dam has a T and a T. The sire has a T and a T. The sire 1 has a T and a T. And sire 2 has an A and a T. So the calf could only get a T from the dam, and that's what she's referred to as being homozygous for that SNP at that location. She has 2 copies of the same variation. The sire 1 also is homozygous at that SNP location. He only has T's at that location. And so this calf had to get an A from either the dam or the sire. And I guess just to back up, we didn't really talk about it, but so, you know, every animal has two copies of those chromosomes. One copy came from the father, one copy came from the mother or the dam. And so, you know, one variation had to come from the sire, one variation had to come from the dam. And so that's really what we're trying to hone in on these on the parentage test. And so again, this calf has an A that came from somebody, and really of the dam and sire one don't have an A. So those two cannot be parents together. We don't know which one of them is a parent. Maybe the dam was entered in wrong, but the two of these could not qualify together. However, sire 2 could possibly be the parent. So if we looked at the next SNP location, the calf has 2 Gs. The calf is homozygous there with 2 Gs. The calf could have gotten each G from the dam or the sire 1, and sire 2 is also a possibility there. And so we can't really make any statements based on SNP 2. Also SNP 3 doesn't exclude any parents at SNP 3. The calf is heterozygous, meaning he's got 2 different variations at that point. He's got a G and he's got a C. He could have gotten the C from the dam. She's homozygous. She will always pass along the C. Sire 1 is homozygous for the other variation, G, and will always pass along the G. And then sire 2 is heterozygous. So again, we can't really make any inference based on SNP 3. But here at SNP 4, we can kind of get into a bit more of a conclusion. SNP 4, the calf has 2 T's. He's homozygous for the T variation. The sire 1 is homozygous for the opposite, so he would always pass along an A. So sire 1 cannot be the sire of this calf. The dam could have passed on a T, and sire 2 could have passed on the T. So from this short example, if these were all of our SNPs and all of our candidates, we could conclude that sire 1 cannot be the father of this calf. Sire 2 and the dam could have made this calf as, you know, from a trio analysis. So hopefully that makes sense. In reality, these parent verification tests look at 100 different SNPs, and so frequently we only have a sire that we're comparing. But once you look at 100 different locations, it's usually pretty obvious. I shouldn't say usually pretty obvious. It doesn't mean 100% that animal is a sire, but the odds are that animal is if it was able to provide the genotypes at each one of those locations. And so anyway, that's how the parentage works, and it's really a slick tool and an important test that we have at our abilities, and that parent verification is included in the genomic panels, in the GGP-LD and the GGP-HD panels. So why should people care about genomics in the cattle business? And the real crux of the matter is it enhances their EPDs, it gets their EPDs more accurate earlier in an animal's life than without genomics included. And so really it's this balance between time and money. And so to get that same accuracy, it would take progeny testing of those animals. and that takes, depending on the trait, it can be at least a year until you have calves on the ground. But, for things like stability, think about how long it takes to really get proven animals for a trait like stability. It's years, absolutely years. So what genomics do is just you're not going to get to high accuracy animals just by using genomics, but you're going to increase your accuracy. So maybe the animal goes from a 10% accuracy in a EPD for a certain trait to 20% accuracy, or something along those lines. So it just bumps up that accuracy earlier in an animal's life. And so this is oversimplified, but for the purpose of this talk, I think it does the trick. So an animal, when they start off in their life, basically their EPD is made up of a average of their sire and the dam EPD. But as we get more and more information on that animal, as their own measurements for different traits come in, and then certainly as we get progeny records from their progeny, we start to get that EPD shifted closer to reflect their true breeding value. And we don't know if that EPD is going to go up or go down. The odds are it's going to move. And so what the genomics does is just let us know which direction it's going to move earlier in an animal's life. So here's an example of full siblings. They were flush mates in 1976, and this is the sire and the dam. So if we looked at plan mating from the sire and the dam, here's what we would expect. These animals would start off with traits with EPD measurements shown in this slide. But then as those animals get progeny, then those EPDs become closer reflective of what that individual animal really has in their DNA pool. And if you recall, going back to my siblings, yes, we have things in common, but we also have differences. And those differences depend on which good genes and which bad genes we inherited, from our parents. And so that's also true in cattle. So if you take a look at just calving ease, the calving ease EPD here, these 4 full flush mates would have started off with a calving ease of 0.1, but we had some Eagle here moved up to 4.1, and North Star went down to negative 3.0. So that turns out to be quite a spread. And all 4 of these bulls, developed into high accuracy bulls, and they got there with lots of progeny. And we see lots of differences just in these full sibs. And so basically, it takes time to get to that point, and I don't want to leave you with the impression that DNA will get you to high accuracy animals without any other phenotypes. That's not true. You absolutely have to continue to collect phenotypes. But the DNA just gets you to more accurate animals earlier in that animal's life. And so how does that work? Why do we have variation in animals? If you consider 3 different bulls, and the top bull here has an EPD for some arbitrary trait of 5, and say, more is better. The middle bull is the worst bull then. We've got an EPD of -3, and then the bottom bull is kind of in the middle with the EPD of 1. Well, what DNA does is it kind of looks along the genome at places at DNA markers that influence that particular trait, and it assigns a positive value for variations that add to the trait, and assigns a negative value or a lower value for variations that are associated with a poor performance in that trait. So if you look at this very simplistic example, what you can see is that even this bull that has the best numbers, he's got some markers that don't bode so well for that particular trait. And even the bull with the worst numbers, this bull in the middle, he has got, he's got a -5 on this marker on the far right, but he's also got +4 and +3. So he's got some good markers in there as well as the bad ones. And so it just depends with each calf what proportion of the bad ones they inherit and what proportion of the good ones they inherit. And that's why these get to be, it gets to be fairly complicated, because most of the traits we're looking at, there's hundreds of genes that can influence them, and lots of different DNA markers that can shift those performance or phenotypes in different directions. So I'll try and wrap up here quickly. This gives you just a snapshot. This is 29 chromosomes along the x-axis here, and this each one of these little slits or little bars represents a point along the genome that there's a marker associated with this low density. This would be a very, very low density SNP chip at 10,000. We don't use 10,000. We use 50,000 in our LD, and we use 180,000 in our HD chips. And so this looks like there's quite a few places along the genome that we're looking at, and actually it's more dense than that. But again, just to illustrate, if all we know about an animal is this black line, it's just the pedigree information that we have on them. Here's, these low accuracy animals are the ones on the left-hand side of this graph. If you add genomic information, all that does is boost your accuracy in those low accuracy animals early in their life. The animals that are already out here on the far right of the slide, those are animals that we already know basically what their EPDs are, so adding genomic information to those animals isn't going to change it very much. And the one last thing I'd say is you can think of these as progeny equivalents, and this slide has some dated information in it, but it still gives you an idea. So adding genomics to the information we have on that animal would be like adding Cavingese records on 5 of their progeny, or like adding 28 records on daughters for stability. And so the nice thing about progeny equivalence is you can equate that no matter what the true accuracy is associated with that animal's EPD. So if an animal is he's already got thousands of records and he's a very well proven bull, then adding genomics is like adding 9 records for a yearling weight, and so it's not really going to move the needle very much. But on an animal that's never had any progeny, it's still like adding 9 records, and so that's really where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. So I probably won't go through the different DNA sampling. If you guys have questions, we can go into this at a different time or talk about it in a newsletter. And I'm just going to wrap up in the interest of time and see if there are any questions out there. I do want to make sure I'm not always checking the SPC account. I think Kelsey is pretty reliable there, but here's another avenue to get a hold of me. My email is jatkins@simgene.com, or you can reach me at the office on the phone number there. And just to show you my own little progeny test herd here, here's my daughter Hazel and my middle child Ada and the youngest Greta, and we sure see a lot of differences just in our 3 children, partly due to the genetics that they inherited from my husband and I. So with that, thanks everybody, and any questions we have? I see one here.
Yep, you do have one question from the Hoffmans. Would you like me to read it?
Yeah, so I see that will participants receive the individual DNA data for the CAS? You know, we can talk about it. If folks are interested in getting the individual data, we can sure get that to you. But really, the way that information is meaningful is by incorporating it into the EPD. So if you guys want to see, like as a learning exercise, what those SNPs are for the parentage, for instance, and that comparison, I can sure show you kind of what we see from the lab. But the individual DNA calls, when there's 50,000 markers associated, it's hard for any one person to dig through that unless you know what it means. So anyway, if that's something you're interested in, you know, we can find a way to try and make that possible.
Jackie, I think your phone's giving us a little grief.
Oh yeah, I heard that. I don't know where that's coming from. Anyway, the best way to use that information is by incorporating it into all the rest of the information that we have on that animal and having genomically enhanced CPDs.
And to echo what Jackie just said there, we certainly would be more than willing in a later call to kind of show you what a sample looks like in number format. It's not very exhilarating, but we certainly can incorporate that into a later call. So, but your individual data will certainly go back and correspond to your individual calf, and it will impact the genetic awareness of your calf. It's just not normal protocol to share that those numbers, not because people can't have them. It's just that they're, for the most part, uninterpretable unless you have the right skills, tools, awareness to pull that off. So, with that said, go ahead.
The other cool thing, and I know we're past 7, but the other cool thing about this project, this program, and others like where we're getting carcass records and we're getting individual feed intake, is part of what we're trying to do with genotyping those animals is tying that information to the larger masses that aren't always sending in carcass records, that aren't always getting their own individual feed intake. So the way that we can try and get some of those traits that are really hard to collect and try and know more about those particular traits in animals where we're not getting those kind of records. One way to do that is to tie it in with DNA and DNA-associated markers that influence those traits. And so it's really cool that we're getting feed intake, that we're getting carcass data, and that we're also getting DNA genotypes on these animals. That's it just every little bit helps. So that's really cool that we're doing that with this program.
Yes, and to echo that, so oftentimes as young folks, you are expecting to receive something from some sort of adult or leader in a field, and those are often very valuable experiences. But in this case, you all are actually very much flipping the table, because you all are doing something that's going to provide a lot of cattlemen and cattlewomen awareness that they just can't get on their own. And so you all are empowering the industry en masse by this sort of project. So tip of the hat to you on that. One last thing I forgot to mention earlier, just wanted to mention it just so everybody did know. All the calves arrived safe and healthy. They all looked good. We don't have any sort of snotty noses or messes. Everybody seems comfortable. So in case any of you were curious, I'm sure that some of you were, it seems like all the calves are comfortably and in place. And so with that said, we try to keep these things to an hour, and that we've reached that point in time. So we've seen no more questions at this point in time. So barring someone disagreeing with adjournment, and I don't think that you will, we're going to go ahead and call this first one in the books. We say thank you very much. Remember, you have a week to get your reports into that SPC email. If you have any questions at all, you let any of us know. We will be tickled to work to help solve that problem. And we look forward to the next report when you're going to start to get quite a little bit more information. So we're excited for that. So, and we will have a guest speaker in our next webinar. You'll get to meet that person in an upcoming newsletter. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, and have a great night. Did I just see what I think I just seen?
What?
Did I see what I think I just saw on the top of the screen?
Yeah, unfortunately a recording error has occurred.
Okay, no big deal. We can deal with that.
It has a what?
But